What's up YouTube? Today I'm going to go over Frost Blades. I did swap my character back to Frost Blades, and you can see here I bought a new MTX from PoE. It's called the Moving Portal Effect. It's pretty much like you have 6 layers of defense, so you can pretty much bring it with you wherever you want, and you are always reminded that the best way to play softcore is to have your portals right next to you, and so you always remember that you have 6 portals to use. But yeah. But basically the thing kind of bugged out, so I'm not really sure why it's like this. But you can see here I'm farming some Betrayal with Frost Blades. And Frost Blades is pretty good. I know that a lot of people are wondering whether Frost Blades is better or Lightning Strike is better. But it turns out that Frost Blades is good enough after I made some changes so that the single target doesn't really matter anymore, because the single target is enough to almost instantly kill any of the single target bosses. So today I'm going to go over the Frost Blades build and the optimizations I've made, and I will try to put out the guide for it tomorrow or in the next video. And that's why I'm actually playing Frost Blades right now. And then we're going to go look at the 120 million Frost Blades DPS profile, or 112 million, and see what the guy did to get his Frost Blades to be so high damage and why my Frost Blades is so bad. So let's get straight into my build and gear. As you can see on this character, the biggest difference is I no longer have my shaped Call of the Brotherhoods, and that actually is pretty helpful in increasing my HP I need to survive. So you can see I have 5.844, 5,844 HP, and that's massively higher than what I was playing with before, which is about 800 higher, and that makes it a lot easier to survive and just feels a little bit easier overall to build this character. Purely because you can get some resist on rings besides just the implicit on the Call of the Brotherhood. So that's one of the benefits of using Frost Blades, is the fact that you don't need to worry about shaped Call of the Brotherhoods. And that actually does bring down the cost of the build a little bit, because you can get shaped Assassin's Mark Ring of Life or shaped 2 stone rings with some wed roll and some resist for a lot cheaper than you can get shaped Call of the Brotherhoods, which are pretty much a minimum 13 exalts each. And I do have this claw, and people are wondering how you can craft the claw, and it actually turns out to be kind of hard to craft. So one of the best ways is you go on Path of Exile Trade, and you try to sort the claws out by physical DPS, and generally you only want to craft on an Imperial Claw. So let's go look at the claw market, because I think the build's getting a little more popular, so people are wondering. So you want to try to find a claw if the prefix is already finished and it can't be fractured. So this one is pretty good. So this one is a nice candidate. So it's P1, Merciless, Squires, Flaring. It's 50x though, kind of steep. So if you wanted to really do it, you will want to lower the price. So this one is actually really good. So if this is still up, this is a Merciless Flaring, but it has the physical modifiers, and the implicit is actually quite important while doing this, as the implicit can help out a lot. So if you really want to do this, you probably have to make sure the claw is not corrupted. A lot of people actually corrupt the claw for some reason to get the beast quality on it. Not really sure why, but they just think it helps it sell better. So you could also try to filter it out with the price of exalts. So if you're only willing to play 20 exalts, then you can pretty much see the claw that you'll be able to afford. And yeah, this person has a claw for 44, and it's already shaper, so this is not too bad. Crit quality. So you can see that you can get a relatively affordable claw for maybe like 20x or so. And you can definitely buy a slightly worse one, like 425, that's already shaper. Some people will probably have the claws that they already made before, but it's kind of a hard process to get a claw that's really, really good. So Touch of Anguish will probably last you for quite a while. Now the Blizzard Crown, this helmet is pretty much unbeatable. I did craft +1 melee strike range. Well, it's definitely beatable, but for now it will be really hard. So I could probably try to get a resist instead of dex, but at this point the build feels so good that it's kind of hard to upgrade. Now this amulet is actually one of the pieces of gear that's giving me the most trouble. I look at it, it's so good. It's T1 flat fizz, multi, and then 106 life. But the problem with this amulet is it's not int based, and that means that I have to take an int node on a tree, or I did have to take an int node on a tree. But having it be int would be so much better. But I did recraft the multi-mod on this. Before it was projectile speed, projectile damage. I actually recrafted it to be increased damage while leeching, and that actually helped out a lot for my damage. So increased damage while leeching, you can pretty much just think of as wed. And then I also crafted on increased effect of non-damaging ailments. And these rings are the same rings that I had before, so you should try to get an Assassin's Mark ring on one of them. And then any cold damage, wed is also extremely good, and I crafted int on it because I have a really dumb character. And in this ring here, I have accuracy, flat fizz, wed, and then some more resist. So these rings are probably like irreplaceable for me. And then this gloves, I actually finally crafted on attack speed. I divined it to get 89 life. So this gloves is probably very, very good. And you probably will not be able to get a glove this good unless you spend a fortune. This belt I'm using, Headhunter, I do use a Stygian for bossing, depending on what I'm doing. And this is a new pair of boots. I actually did get this run through lab. I think I paid 4 exalts for it. The person actually finished it really, really fast. I have Cannot Be Frozen craft, cooldown recovery for the General's Cry, and then increased effect of Tailwind, and then some ailment immunity. And it also has 30% move speed and 11% increased move speed if you haven't been hit recently. And we don't really need Onslaught. I guess Cannot Be Chilled will be pretty good, but this is probably the best enchant possible. Or the, not enchant, but the move speed variant of the Ashling. And then we have the Eternity Shroud, which is +1 and 47% damage. So this is a pretty similar gear to what I had before. Some of the changes are mainly just recrafting the crafting mod on my amulet and helm. And then we have the Prism Guardian. I did get a white socket on this. And white socket actually helps out a lot. It allows you to switch out an aura without chroming it. And it does come pretty handy. So I did make some socket swaps because I changed up the auras. And it turns out that Skitterbots is actually completely overpowered. And I think there's actually a way to get more ailment if you use Divergent Skitterbots or something. But I pretty much am just using this so that I can shock and chill the bosses. Since I'm Secrets of Suffering right now, we cannot inflict shock, chill, freeze, or ignite. But that doesn't mean that our Skitterbots can't inflict this. So with Skitterbots and Awaken Unbound Ailments, I'm pretty much able to get 26% shock on bosses, which is actually a lot. So it's pretty much like 26% extra damage on top. So having this setup is much better than any Herald or any other aura I could possibly run. And I'm running Hatred and General's Cry right here. I did have Enlightened before, but now I don't really need Enlightened since I'm not running a 50% aura. I'm running Skitterbots instead. And it does help me free up a gem slot. So I also added in multi-totem for Ancestral Warchief and Ancestral Protector. And what that means is that without Ancestral Warchief, Vault Ancestral Warchief, I can have both totems up. And this does help smooth the curve for damage, like on Maven, when you don't always have Vault Ancestral Warchief to go. And it also helps out a little bit on invitations. So here I have Hydra Spear, Whirling Blades, Anomalous Blood Rage, Fortify. So this is pretty much just getting Whirling Blades and Fortify on boss fights. Then I have Anomalous Berserk, and then Steel Skin, Increased Duration. So you can see Steel Skin lasts for 2.63 seconds and the cooldown is 2.2. So you can pretty much just keep spamming this button on cooldown and you pretty much get like double HP. Well, not nearly double HP, but you get a lot more effective HP by spamming Steel Skin, and the increased duration does help it a little bit. So if you don't have increased duration, then it's 2.31 second cooldown time, still 1.5. So this will make it have like over 50% uptime or 60% uptime. And then in the shield, I'm running Petrified Blood, Precision, and Herald of Ash. Now, I'm using Herald of Ash for one main reason. And the reason might sound a little bit cringe because Herald of Purity actually comes out ahead on Poe.ninja or POB on terms of DPS. But with Herald of Ash, we can finally get some nice explosions. This is Automaton explosion. So one of the big downsides of playing this build is the fact that you don't get Herald of Ice explosions because you can't freeze. But if you use Herald of Ash, you get the explosions back, and it actually feels kind of good to play. So this is more of an aesthetic reason. Herald of Purity is probably more damage by 0.3%, but it's more important to look good than to be functional, as they say. So that pretty much covers all of the gems. And then, oh yeah, for the Frost Blades, I'm using Cold to Fire, Night Blade, Awaken Added Cold, Divergent Multi Strike, Wed, and Cold to Fire. So you can see I did make a lot of changes to the build to make it more optimal. And I did try to check out dual wield. And dual wield actually ends up being a tiny damage increase. And it's pretty much the fact that you can't run the extra auras. And Herald of Ash does add a little bit of damage and having to run precision. So that actually makes a pretty big difference. And for the tree, I did drop this one node here because I didn't really feel like the power charge generation was that useful in boss fights. And I picked up this 6% life node, so that's why I have more life. Ideally, if you wanted to make this build more hardcore, you probably drop this, try to get an Intimidate with Fire Res on one of these jewels on a Lethal Pride, and then put more points into life. Because at this point, life is pretty much... If you can get this build to like 6.5k life, if you took all of these life nodes, you would have a pretty hardcore viable build. So that's pretty much the big thing. So you could probably drop like some... I don't even know what you could drop, but you would have to drop damage, if anything. So you could probably drop this stuff up here if you wanted to make a build that's more hardcore oriented, as they say. But since we're playing softcore, it's probably better to just have more damage, as it will feel a lot better. So yeah, but let's see. Now we're gonna go look at the 112 million Frostblades profile. That is actually what inspired me to play Frostblades. I saw that profile and I'm like, man, I could get that damage, but it turns out that there's some problems with the profile. So let's see how our good skill Frostblades is doing in terms of representation. So it's at 0.5%. I think it's up a little bit more. And how many Berserkers? Oh, there's a lot more Berserkers now. So before I started this whole journey, there was only like 2 or 3 Berserkers. So hopefully some of these people are just playing the build and other people are not. So most of the people that are playing Eternity Shroud. So there's actually a lot of people who aren't playing Eternity Shroud or Cold to Fire variant. So there's a lot of different variants. Most of the people are using Eternity Shroud, 53%. But our goal here is to look at this profile. So right off the bat, 112 million. This person doesn't use Cold to Fire conversion. And if you have a really high damage on Pob, it means you're not using Secrets of Suffering, because the config for Secrets of Suffering doesn't actually get checked. So when you actually import a Pob over with Secrets of Suffering, it doesn't have the node allocated, and you will not have any Scorched or Brittle effect. So there's that. So immediately you can see that this person actually uses Divergent Summon Skitterbots, Enlighten, Hatred, Awaken, Unbound Ailment. So the reason why you use Divergent Summon Skitterbots is you have 10% extra increased effect. So this is actually a pretty smart setup. Now in terms of the helm, he does use Berserk effect, which is what we have. And he has life, cold res, and then he has nearby enemies have -12 to cold res and 9% increased elemental damage. So this helm is actually not that much more damage than mine. And the reason why you have -12 cold res is because he doesn't convert the cold to fire, because you actually don't really need that if you don't use Secrets of Suffering. So he does use 2 weapons or 2 foils, and dual wield is actually, I think dual wield is slightly more damage. So if you try to go for the maximum damage, always dual wield. And if you're using a foil, you also get 2 implicits with 25% multi. So these foils are extremely, extremely good for Shaper foils. So this is pretty much like as good as it's going to get. And then this foil actually has Gains Fizz as extra cold, which is actually one of the best damage stats for us. And they're both T1, what's it called? Is this an Essence foil? How did he get 29% attack speed? That's actually just pretty wild. Oh, it's a Warlord. So there's a Warlord hybrid mod there. So these foils are pretty much as good as it's going to get for a Shaper foil. So here we move on to the Amulet. He does use Panopticon, which is a totem anoint, and there's really no anoint that even comes close to this. Now, the big thing here is you can see that he does start sacrificing life on his pieces or jewelry in order to get more damage. So here he has extra mod here of 4 to 42 lightning damage and gains Fizz as extra cold. Now, for me personally, I have damage while leeching, which is probably better than 4 to 42 lightning. But then I have life instead of gains 18% of Fizz as extra cold. And then he actually crafts on +1 minimum frenzy charges, because I don't think Poe.ninja gives you frenzy charge damage unless you have some way of generating it, so that's probably why he has it. So this ring here actually is pretty good. So this person actually probably played the build because he actually has the int you need. So this ring is pretty much just needed for the intelligence. And it's wed, flat fizz, and accuracy, and +1 frenzy again. +1 frenzy is actually a very, very efficient damage craft you can do because it's a more damage multiplier. So this ring here is an Assassin's Mark ring with pretty much full damage, so he doesn't want life on it. So he could definitely craft on life, but he chooses to do fire and cold damage as that increases the damage by the most. So he has attack speed multi for the suffixes and the Assassin's Mark. And that's probably the highest damage suffixes you can possibly get for a ring. And then he has the T1 cold damage along with melee damage. And then the crafted on flat damage. So now we move on to the gloves, which is where the build starts getting a little weird. So if you don't get Tribal Fury, which is a node down here that gives you strikes additional enemies, and then you also don't get strike on your gloves, and you also don't have Tribal Fury anoint on your amulet, that means your build is not going to feel very good to play because you're not going to be able to clear as well, since you're not striking additional enemies. So instead of 1 Frost Blades in a big pack, you'll have, instead of 3 Frost Blades in a big pack, you'll have 1 Frost Blades coming out. And that actually ends up being a huge problem. Now, the reason you do this is because this allows you to get a pretty high damage gloves. Although I think you can probably get additional strike if you spam the Abyssal Sockets. But in order to craft it with an Abyssal Socket of strikes to additional enemies, it's probably really, really expensive. And Abyssal Socket is pretty big because if you look at the Abyssal Socket here, it gives you 30 life, 12 multi, 6 to 8 flat fizz, and 8% attack speed. And that's just absolutely crazy. And you also get increased elemental damage, increased damage during any flask effect, and 16% attack speed. So this is pretty much a pair of gloves of as much damage as possible. Now the boots here, we have increased effective tailwind, and he doesn't have elusive, but elusive actually doesn't increase the damage. But he has pen enchant and an onslaught on kill. And overall, this pair of boots is not even crazy good, but it does fix a lot of the resist issues, and I'm pretty sure he's actually trying to play this character. And now we have to look at the Watcher's Eye, right? Watcher's Eye is a pretty big item for damage, and he has the perfect Watcher's Eye in terms of hatred, crit, cold pen, and then he has CB jewel and then cold pen. So like when you're trying to get like fight for survival, you can get like pretty good stuff on it. You can get cold pen, you can get increased effective ailments, and there's a lot of stuff, and you can get a corrupted blood jewel for pretty cheap. Now here we move on to some interesting choices. Blanketed Snow, Vengeful Commander, and he has Blanketed Snow, Vengeful Commander. And this actually ends up being a pretty high DPS large cluster. However, if you feed the Fury and fuel the fight and martial prowess is actually more damage. I actually took the profile and put it into Pob. So a jewel like this, or a cluster like this, will actually end up giving more damage. But that's because I think it counts as leeching on Pob or Poe.ninja. So now we go on to the jewels, and the reason why you dual wield, as always, is not purely because of the damage you gain immediately, it's because of the access to multi while dual wielding. So Frost Blades is a pretty good skill because Frost Blades is an elemental skill, it's a cold skill, and it also gets dual wield, and you also get melee multi. And something to keep in mind is that Poe.ninja only accounts for the melee portion of Frost Blades. So it is in his best interest to only scale the melee portion, even if it's probably less damage than scaling both the projectile and the melee, since you can hit the mob with both the melee and projectile with Hydro Spear up. So you can see here, he pretty much has all 4 modded jewels. So this is triple multi attack speed with swords, life double multi attack speed, life double attack speed multi, life double attack speed multi, and life triple multi. So in order to get insane gear, insane damage, you have to have 4 prop jewels, it seems like. And then he has Stygians, which are both 4 props, the 35 life, flat fizz, multi, and attack speed, and that seems to be the best combination. So let's go look at this guy's gem link. So he has Frost Bomb, but he doesn't have a link to cast 1 damage taken. I'm pretty sure this is just to apply cold exposure. And generally, he's probably not going to be casting Frost Bomb, so this is kind of like an adding on something that's probably not going to get used that much in bossing, especially when you have 112 mil DPS So he does have 2 totems. I'm not sure how. I'm not sure if Poe.ninja actually looks at if you have the ability to cast 2 totems, but basically he has Vol Ancestral Warchief, Phantasmal Ancestral Protector. So he can put down the Vol Ancestral Warchief and have the Ancestral Protector up at the same time. And Enhance on Berserk is a pretty good benefit, I think, as is Anomalous Summon Ice Golem. So this increases the buff effect of the Golem, giving him higher crit chance. And I think this just gives you 20% increased attack damage. So it's pretty much having 24% increased attack damage. And then he does have Whirling Blades Fortified. And his links are Frost Blades, Ruthless, Awaken Multi-Strike, Inspiration, Wed, Attic Cold. And he can't use Night Blade since he's using Swords, and Ruthless is something that only scales the melee component. So there's probably another gem better than Ruthless, and probably better than Inspiration, but I think this is pretty much just his mapping setup. I actually have this guy's chest. He actually sold it to me. So if you look at the rolls of his chest, 79, 17, 5, 104, 147. So mine's exactly the same. So I actually bought his chest from him. I'm actually the new him. So I actually do the same amount of damage as him now, but not really. So basically you can see this character. How do you actually get numbers this high? The answer is honestly having perfect jewels, having really good weapons, having every single mod on your gear be useful for damage. And Abyss jewels are actually very, very strong. And not having a movement speed flask helps. Having all damage flasks, Lion's Roar, Cinder Swallow, Taste of Hate, Bottle of Faith, and Alchemist Diamond Flask Acceleration. So is this profile kind of fluffed up for damage? Yeah, because he's not using strikes additional enemies, and he does have some stuff that he probably will never cast, but in terms of how it ends up playing, it's probably more than fine. And honestly, this profile is not that far out there in terms of someone's actual mapping profile. So props to this guy. He had insane gear, and that's how he was able to get 112 mil, and it's actually what inspired me to play Frost Blades in the first place. But now I'm going to show some bossing footage with this new setup with Frost Blades I have. And yeah. Overall, this character, I was able to get the feared kill speeds, pretty much the same as the Vol Lightning Strike character. So that was pretty good, and I'm pretty happy with that. And I will try to make a gear with a budget build. And I will tomorrow on stream try to use some more budget gear and see how it goes. I did use a Touch of Anguish before already, and it was perfectly fine. But for bossing, it's a little harder. I did do the feared with Touch of Anguish also, so it's definitely doable. And I think with the Skitter boss tech and using multiple totems, it should make the single target a lot better when you do the boss fights. Skitter boss of Unbound Ailments is literally like a 26% shock effect that I didn't have before. And remember to craft on increased damage while leeching on the amulet if possible. It's pretty much a T1 wed roll. And definitely use a shield. I think a shield is actually one of the big things that help the survivability of this build. And Petrified Blood is actually really good because it does give you Overleech without using the Glorious Vanity with Supreme Ego. And that allows you to pick up a Lethal Pride to get Intimidate. And it also gives you Curse and Ailment immunity in maps with Divination Distillate. But thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you find more mirrors and exalts than I do. And I'll see you next time. Bye.